are now tuned in to the Storm Tracker podcast.
Welcome back to the Storm Tracker podcast. I'm Marcus Benjamin, representing for CanesCounty.com. Make sure you subscribe to Canes County for free. Use the promo code Miami30, part of the Rivals.com network. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast, the Storm Tracker podcast, on all platforms. And of course, subscribe to this YouTube channel live from Canes County. And it's a Blu Monday, ladies and gentlemen, which means Larry Blustein is joining me today. Thanks for joining me once again, Larry.
Anytime, Marcus. Thank you.
And Larry, we are in October already. Can you believe it? I mean,
No.
It's like flying by already. And, next thing you know, we're going to be talking playoffs and high school football.
Yeah.
And, maybe potentially a bowl game for the Miami Hurricanes. The Canes have started out 4-0, and I actually have them starting out 5-0 to start the season. But a lot of good things that I've seen from the team as far as, their strengths, their weaknesses. I kind of love that the way that they are able to run the ball, pass the ball, stop the run, create pressure on the quarterback. Those are the areas that have kind of impressed me, Larry. What has impressed you about the Miami Hurricanes 4-0 start?
Well, obviously, the fact that they've really changed that roster, and you and I have talked about it, it's a completely different roster, especially at some key spots like offensive line and linebacker, the depth at running back, some emerging stars at receiver, defensive secondary getting better and better. And I think that this is a team that has played better and better every week. Obviously it's tough to get up for a Bethune-Cookman or maybe of a Miami of Ohio, but the very fact that they have a signature win, and let me tell you, it's a signature win over Texas A&M, because here's a Texas A&M team that's taken everybody apart and will have a legitimate shot this weekend to beat Alabama at home. I mean, a legitimate shot. So that shows you Miami's potential to play at a high level, and they did. And and I think that sometimes you play up to the level or down to the level of your competition. And so far, Miami's been pretty good against everybody. Their defense has come to play. Their offense, obviously, is a work in progress in a lot of ways. I mean, you have a great quarterback, but your offensive line is, going through changes and depth problem. But this is a great start. I mean, I thought they'd be off to, after their first 5 games to 4-1. I thought they'd lose to A&M. And then obviously things get tougher, but to be in this position at 4-0 with this Saturday night's game against Georgia Tech looming an opportunity for Miami to be a top 15 team at 5-0 when they go to Chapel Hill.
Yeah, you talked about Georgia Tech, which kind of signifies the beginning of the ACC season for the Miami Hurricanes. It's their first ACC game of the year. The rest of the game from here on out are conference games. So the ACC, from what I've seen, Larry, not that tough this year. Even the top teams, I think, have some flaws in them. There are only 2 teams that are currently ranked ahead of the Hurricanes in the polls from the conference, with Florida State and North Carolina. And those teams have looked, sketchy at times. Florida State had to pull out a tough win against Boston College. North Carolina battled with Appalachian State in overtime to get a win. So those teams aren't, world beaters by any stretch. And the ACC schedule for the Hurricanes in particular, not particularly that tough as well. You got a Virginia team that's struggling, and then you got this Georgia Tech team coming of this week that, lost to Bowling Green last week. So this conference suddenly seems very winnable for the Hurricanes. Dare I say it, Blue?
Yeah.
Um, what are the chances do you think that this team can actually win the conference this year?
I mean, obviously, the game at Tallahassee is going to be a major, a war coming off a 45-3 loss to them last year.
Sure.
And albeit Miami's gotten their roster a little bit different, Florida State, as you mentioned, everybody, it's all about matchups. You take a look at the Miami Dolphins and they score 70 points one week and then they almost get 50 scored on them the next. So it's about matchups and what happens. And you bring up Georgia Tech. Remember, Georgia Tech beat Wake Forest, and Wake Forest is not awful. So anything could happen. I think that the ACC, as you said, is probably more winnable than it's been. It's been Clemson, basically only Clemson, and then Florida State kind of joined it last year. North Carolina's been real strong. But, I think I go with the fact that you have to take each week at one at a time. And, right now, Georgia Tech, where everyone goes, oh, we'll win that game. But, you never know. You never know. You had a week off. Are you going to come out rusty? I mean, after last year, Marcus, nothing's a for sure type of thing. So,
right.
I look at every game and can they win? Yeah, they can win. But you got teams like Louisville who can play. NC State on any given day can beat you, especially at home. But to me, the key game is going to be this Georgia Tech game, getting to 5-0 and being one game from bowl eligibility, which is huge. I mean, now, we sat home last year and watched schools like Eastern Michigan and New Mexico State and programs like that go to bowl games, and Miami didn't go. And I think it's essential that Miami, they could get their bowl eligibility, either at home against Clemson or on the road against North Carolina Chapel Hill. So, the schedule is doable, and no doubt about it. I mean, especially, and I do look at Texas A&M as a barometer. That was a really good football team. I think people kind of underestimated, what type of team Texas A&M, but they were strong up front, probably the biggest team by far Miami's going to face. And they came through it and played very well for all four quarters. So Miami plays like that the rest of the way. I agree with you. They have a really legitimate shot to win this ACC. They could, Clemson obviously is, a mortal type of team. We saw them lose to Duke, who's another team that took Notre Dame down to the wire on Saturday. So everybody in the conference is, has stood out one way or another. So I just revert back to any given day, Saturday or whatever day they play. Anything could happen. You just got to bring your A game every week. I know, talking to Mario Cristobal at some of the games on the sideline, with the high school games, and he feels the same way. The potential's there, but the experience, and the depth, could be a concern when you start playing heavyweights every week and you get kids hurt. Do you have capable backups, to step in?
Yeah, that will definitely be a story for the Hurricanes as we continue to progress through the season. Can they sustain injuries? Can they battle through the attrition of football? And we shall see. I think the bye week came at a perfect time for them right before conference play to really get healthy and get focused for this important run. And if they get a win this Saturday against Georgia Tech, they'll match their win total from last year.
Yeah,
which is
crazy.
Which is unbelievable to say. And like you said, they'll be one win away from bowl eligibility. Now let's take a more of a deep dive on these opponents in the next month. I mean, we got Georgia Tech and then they also have North Carolina right after that, and then they also play Virginia, They've got Louisville, Florida State, like you said, they have, and then they have Boston College as well. You already kind of alluded to which team would be the toughest out for Miami, and that's winning in Tallahassee. And I agree. I think that is definitely the toughest game for them because of the environment, because of the rivalry. I think they can get the win against Georgia Tech, even though I think that's going to be actually closer than people think, just because that team got embarrassed last week against Bowling Green, and then, well, football teams they don't like to lose in that fashion, especially because they were up big in that game and Bowling Green kind of bowled over them in the second half. It was
especially coming off that win against Wake Forest too.
Right, exactly. So I think that's going to be a tough out. North Carolina, I think, is also, of course, going to be a tough one for them. It's going to be a road environment in the ACC, first one for them for the year. So that's always going to be tough. But what do you think could be the potential roadblocks between them and an ACC title, besides, of course, Florida State?
Clemson, obviously. Miami hasn't done very well with Clemson, especially over the last decade. They've been embarrassed plenty of times, but they have them home. And that's the one thing that's I think you're going to see a sea of orange. But I think what Miami will do is they'll have everyone wear green so they can kind of distinguish themselves. But that's going to be packed. You're going to look at 550 to 60,000, maybe even more for that game. I'm sure it's going to be on, it's going to be a 3:30 start most likely, so the entire country can see them. So that's going to be really a hurdle. We know those games that may not look significant to some people because they go off of past performances. Louisville's very good. Coach Brahm has come back to his alma maters, turned things around, and recruit real well. We know because they recruited down here extremely well, getting, guys like Capers from Columbus and having a bunch of kids already, on the roster. So they've done extremely well. NC State is an on and off type of team, but if they're on, they could be a thorn in your side. And certainly you said Boston College, which probably illustrates the entire rest of the season, because look at Boston College, even though they're getting toasted by everybody, look at they did against Florida State. So it shows you, and they could have won that game. They could have won that game very easily, Boston College. So I'm a subscriber of taking things one at a time. And all the focus now is on Georgia Tech. And then you turn your attention to another ACC road game at Chapel Hill.
Absolutely. Speaking of this Georgia Tech game, Georgia Tech, I think I called them. But speaking of Georgia Tech, this game obviously is important. Miami has shown the ability to run the ball very well and to stop the run very well as well. And when you do that, those two particular things, you can do so many things as a football team. And I think that's the strength of this team, their ability to kind of run the ball, which kind of opens up the passing game or makes the passing game a lot easier, and the ability to stop the run the way they have. I mean, people might say, oh, well, they play Miami of Ohio and Temple, but Miami of Ohio is actually shown that they're a pretty decent team as well.
Yeah.
They beat Cincinnati, which Cincinnati, kept it somewhat close against Oklahoma, who scores a lot and only scored 20 against Cincinnati. So I do think their schedule set them up well for the rest of the season. You really kind of seen what the strengths and the weaknesses are on this team. But what do you think are the strengths and the weaknesses for the Miami Hurricanes going into the rest of the season?
Well, I think their line play is really has been a surprise, especially on the offensive line. Obviously Lee and Cohen have been huge additions, but it's kind of elevated everybody else up front. And you're seeing a lot of the other players kind of step up and make an impact only because they've rallied around some experience up front. So that's been huge. I think defensively on the defensive line, I mean, Leonard Taylor's starting to step up. You're getting the young kid Bain, who is going to be the next superstar, obviously, for the team in the mix, along with, and you got to remember, guys like Messidor have been injured, and so they haven't been at full strength. But you get Nigel Lee Kelly, you're getting a chance to see some of the future kids, and I think also the big addition is at linebacker, where Mauanoa's brother, Kiko, has done a tremendous job, and it's given them an opportunity with Wesley Basaint. And you look at Corey Flagg, that's my guy, because I'm a productivity guy. And over the last 2 years, Corey's led the team in tackles, and it gives him an opportunity to come in, as a depth instead of being a frontline player now. So he gets to come in as depth, and the secondary slowly but surely, with the addition of Davis that came in from Oklahoma. Obviously, Darryl Porter Jr. has done a good job. Both the Brown brothers have done tremendous. And then James Williams, has started to elevate his game. And then you get Cam Kinchins back for the Georgia Tech game. So I think things are falling into place as far as what they're doing from a defensive standpoint, from an offensive line standpoint. And then we know they've got a stable of running backs who are all different, from Parrish, obviously, to the kid that you like. And I know AJ, he hasn't really gotten an opportunity to really play a lot. And I think he's going to be a back that's going to be a force. To Chaney as a hard runner. We saw Fletcher. Yeah, we saw Fletcher as a freshman who is reliable, a downhill runner. Once he gets momentum, you don't want to be a safety standing in his way. And then receiving cores. I mean, you have your slot people. Restrepo has been one of the best in the country. So all these naysayers and all these people who have been, negative towards him ever since he was in Little League have begun to shut up, because he's a reliable source. He's averaging 5 receptions a game, one of the best receptions or receivers in the country from that standpoint. And then you look at, obviously, the Jacoby George kid who's starting to come on. And we expected that last year because of the fact that, he was heralded coming out of Plantation, and we thought that he would be the guy. And then all of a sudden you got a kid like Young, who's a big body guy, kind of a future NFL type of guy because of his size. He's got speed. He does extremely well. The only thing we haven't really gotten a lot of, because of the fact that Arroyo's been out, is that tight end. You've had, obviously, I was going to say young man, but he's not that young, coming from Oregon, who's, like a 6-year senior. But at the same time, you're getting a chance to look at some of the younger guys there too. I just think on the overall, and their special teams really sound. Kicking the ball, Borregales is one of the best in the country, most reliable in the nation. So I think you have, when they play up to their potential, a team that can line up on any given day and play anybody. And I'm sorry to keep reverting back to the Texas A&M game, but look what they've been doing. They went to Arkansas and made a shambles of them. They won at home against Auburn. And like I said, they have an opportunity this coming week at home to knock off Alabama and legitimately knock them off.
Yeah. When you look at the top teams, Blue, for me, I think Texas is the number 1 team in the nation. In my opinion, I think they're better than Georgia. I think they're better than Michigan. When you look at, their schedule and who they've beaten, the fact that they beat Alabama by 10 points and then
Yeah.
Alabama, took care of business against Ole Miss. I think
they still have Oklahoma coming up, and that's never going to be an easy chore for them. Every year the best team don't always win in that game.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's this week coming up. So it's one of my favorite rivalries to kind of watch every year. So we'll see what kind of happens there. But
right,
I think my point really being is that I think Miami can line up and play well against anybody because they have the fundamentals from a football team that you want to see as far as stopping the run consistently and being able to run the football. And this is a vertical passing game. You saw in this game against Temple that I'm showing here that they were able to not only run the ball, but they were able to pass the ball downfield as well. I mean, the Hurricanes ranked 3rd overall in offense, 5th in passing, 4th in receiving, 3rd in rushing, 3rd in run defense, 10th in tackling, and 4th in creating pressure. So they're in the top 10 in a bunch of major categories, according to Pro Football Focus. So I think this team is a bit underrated at 17, but that ultimately really doesn't matter because, everything will start to play out on the field and teams will start losing kind of here, one by one, I guess you could say. And we'll really start to see Miami kind of ascend in the ranks and in the national mindset or narrative, so to speak.
Yeah.
So Blue,
you win and everything takes care of itself.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Blue, you were at some games last week. You're kind of at games every week, and seeing what's out there on the high school gridiron, and so was the coaching staff, and you saw Mario Cristobal out there, and what are some of the guys that you see or have seen this season so far, now that we're a month into high school football, that are off the radar that maybe Miami should maybe kind of look into to add to their 24 or 25 or 26 class?
Yeah, well, that's the one thing. That's why Coach Cristobal has been out at a lot of games. He was out at the American Heritage Plantation game. The Chaminade American Heritage Plantation game. Obviously, there's not a lot of under the radar kids. Not in this day and age. There's so many people, like Frank and other people that watch these kids, on a daily, weekly basis that uncover them at every classification. But the one thing is the defined kids. Josiah Trader is a kid that Miami already has on board. You look at the kid Patterson, who's a beast. Sure. But the main focus now, obviously, is Smith. And this kid is a different level guy. Everybody had seen him playing wide receiver for Chaminade says that he's the best high school football receiver they've ever seen. And that's coming from, like the Mario Cristobals of the world. And that's coming.
What about for you? Is he the best you've ever seen?
Best high school guy. I mean, obviously, seeing a lot of kids down here, like Andre Johnson and Roscoe Parrish and Dwayne Bowe and guys like that who kind of emerged at the next level. It became, like Isaac Bruce and people like that. It became NFL Hall of Famers, Michael Irvin. But nobody's ever been like this in high school. And he's so fluid and he's so strong and he's got the size. And, I was last week against Coconut Creek. I was standing on the sideline with Coach Mike McIntyre from FIU, and he had never seen him before. Because that's obviously not the type of guy that FIU could legitimately get. And he watched him, and I think he watched him for 10 minutes and kind of, remarked to himself that this is a guy that, you just don't get a kid like that. It's just, the kid's at a whole different level. And obviously, Miami's trying to get the kids locally they did, and that's why Coach Cristobal went to the Central last week. Are they trying to flip Luane McCoy? That could be. I mean, the kid's committed to Florida State, but he's a difference maker, as he showed in the game against Chaminade and showed in several games against Gorman and schools like that. And they already have Vince Shavers, who's a linebacker and getting better and better. So I don't think there's a lot of under the radar kids per se that Miami's looking at. I just think that they're trying to solidify the kids that they do have and kind of, how the recruiting game is. You have to show love all the time. And these kids, if you're not coming out to see them, and I think that's, I know Coach Gaddis had a lot of faults, but it was because of him that Miami landed Ray Joseph, because he showed him a lot of love. You and I were at that kickoff classic a year ago, or a spring game at Palm Beach Gardens. And he was there watching Edison play through the whole, 2-3 quarters of what they played. And I think that's what the kids remember the most. So you look at somebody like a Jeremiah Smith, and he's going to see more and more of Kevin Beard or Mario Cristobal. And he goes, you know what? I mean, I'd like to stay home, and you figure if he comes in, I mean, that elevates that position tenfold. And that's, right now, obviously there's not a major amount of offensive linemen in South Florida. I mean, Miami's kind of honed in on the defensive players that they want, secondary wise, also, as I mentioned, a linebacker. So I think in the recruiting game has changed because of the fact that you have the portal. And you look at a team like Florida State, who's hit gold in the portal, especially with their wide receiving core. And, I mean, that's the wave of recruiting, unfortunately, for some people, is that a lot of these high school freshmen are not really as much in the mix as they used to be, because of the fact that you're going to try to get and fill your roster with kids who have experience and can plug and play right away. And that's changed the recruiting game so much, just over the last 2 years. To the point where, I mean, next year, even though Miami has a couple of quarterbacks on the line and, obviously Nickel, the junior kid out of Georgia, they may have to go into the portal next year to get a junior, senior type of guy who's got the experience. Because when you're losing Van Dyke, there's a big drop off, and I know that potentially, with what they have now on the roster are really, really good and potential kids. But I think that with the portal, you live in the here and now. And that's where a lot of, and that's the most amazing thing. If you watch a college football game these days, like I watch some of the USC and Colorado game, every time they mention a kid, they say, well, he's a transfer from. See, and that's what this has gotten to be now. All these schools like the Floridas and programs that in the past kind of turn their nose up at the portal are now using it as a lifeline. And that's what changed. That's what's changed recruiting. So you could go after these marquee freshmen, but they have to be marquee freshmen. They can't be fringe guys, because now you could go into the portal and get a junior or a senior who could come in and play right away. And then you could, get your younger kids a year after. So it's about winning. And as you mentioned, schools like Texas and schools like Oregon is a perfect example. They brought in quite a few kids under Coach Lanning. So it's going to be interesting to see what's going to happen. But, there's a lot of guys. There's not a whole lot of players, high school players, Miami's looking to flip. Maybe 4 or 5, but they're also waiting on, word from a couple of linemen out of state, who haven't made their decision yet. And I think as time comes closer, and also the kid Nye from the receiver from Georgia. There's another kid there who, the thing is people see, if these kids sit home and watch a A&M game on TV against Miami or one of those big time games, and they go, oh, wait a minute, I'd like to be a part of that.
Right.
And, a lot different than them watching Middle Tennessee State come in and beat Miami at home. So this is a whole different level. And I think, with Coach Cristobal being a recruiting guy like he is, along with, and that's the thing people don't understand. He brought in guys like Kevin Beard and Timmy Ice Harris Jr. and people like that, what's Nicholson, that can recruit, Marcus. And the kids love them, and that's the thing. And look at how the wide receiver core has been elevated by just having Kevin Beard there and him, going over technique and showing them different things. And same thing with the running game. I mean, Tim Harris arguably has one of the and remember Devontae Citizen, and they got the other kid that committed, I believe Riley, is that his name?
Kevin Riley, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, who's regarded as one of the best in the country. So over the next couple of years, Miami's going to be off the charts as running game. I mean, and that's great because that's the offense that they've built around. They built around a 50-50 type of offense, run pass, but they're heavy when they can run the ball. And, when a team's going to gear up and maybe play the pass very well, I think that's where, the running game comes in. So, it's a work in progress, but the talent level is so much better than it was last year.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the transfer portal is going to create a lot of parity in college football. I think finally we're going to see like what we see in college basketball at times. We'll see like a Cinderella type of story actually make a run, especially with the playoffs expanding, soon. It's going to be finally some parity like the NFL has, because usually the NFL, you kind of never know. I mean, there's one or two, maybe three favorites kind of consistently every year, but there's always a team that kind of comes in and makes a run. And I think with the transfer portal, you can do that immediately now. You don't have to wait for
I agree.
years in recruiting to kind of build a program up. And that's what Mario Cristobal has done here with getting key transfers. Like you said, you mentioned Kiko Mauanoa, and of course Matt Lee is a key transfer with Javion Cohen. These guys transferred in are impact players for this football team, and you see that around the country. And I think you're going to continue to see that in college football. You're just going to see teams like you said, at USC, they got a bunch of transfers last year, and they kind of got a quick turnaround from
not on defense, perhaps, but their offense is like NFL like. And see, that's a guy like Caleb Williams. He's going to go to the NFL next year, and he's going to be Patrick Mahomes. I mean, I know that's sometimes you hate to throw out those, those accolades, but you watch him. I mean, he's control. He's got a great arm. He throws off balance. He runs. And that's a guy that you bring in, and not taking any shots at Bryce Young. Bryce Young was a very good quarterback, but very few quarterbacks coming out have the dimension that a Jacob, what's his name, brings to the table. Just that, as a game changer. And that's what I'm saying. That's what's happening in college now, where you have a couple of these kids that come in, like FSU with Johnny Wilson, came from Arizona State, a great 6'6" wide receiver. And then the other young man who came from Michigan State, who has been a heart and soul for them. And you could turn things around in a hurry. And that's what's happened in a lot of these schools. You remember 3 years ago, everyone goes, oh, man, Coach Norvell, he'll never make it. They're not good. But all of a sudden, trip to the portal, getting kids like that and getting kids like, on defense. And that's just, it changes the entire complexion. And that's the one thing I brought up. I was on with somebody yesterday, and we were talking, and I brought up exactly what you and I said, and about here, everybody on Saturday when you're playing, they go, Joe Smith, a transfer from Arkansas, or Willie Jones, a transfer, and that's what I'm saying. These rosters have turned over so much. And, obviously Colorado is an anomaly because you don't get 78 kids, every year. I mean, I think that I've always said that probably the biggest hero in that at Colorado is the registrar's office, because they had to make sure that all 78 kids were eligible. I mean, they had to go over all their classes and what transferred, and people don't realize, but that's an that's a task that never gets the real play. But that's true. It's the recruiting part is just more than just lining up and playing football. There's a whole chemistry when you get that many new kids in. All those guys got to kind of be on the same page. And Miami's been very fortunate with the kids that they've brought in from the portal that kind of just fit in seemingly.
Yeah, absolutely, which is making them a contender for the ACC. And we'll see how they start against Georgia Tech on Saturday night. Should have a lot of those guys back from injury, and of course, like we've talked about, those transfers, including Jaden Davis, who I forgot to mention.
Yes,
another impact transfer to make an impact. That's Larry Blustein, ladies and gentlemen. He's kind enough to join me on a Monday. Long-time South Florida reporter. Thanks again for joining me for this podcast, Blue, and hopefully we can get you on again sometimes.
Yeah, anytime, Marcus. I appreciate you.
Absolutely. And of course, make sure you subscribe to this podcast, the Storm Tracker podcast, on all platforms, and also subscribe to CanesCounty.com for free. Use the promo code Miami30, part of the Rivals Network. Until the next episode.